Joe Buck, I'm the mayor of Lake Oswego. It's my pleasure to welcome you here to I'm delighted that you all took the time to come out and be a part of this town hall. It's a great opportunity. As we know, the legislature is in its long session right now. Our legislators are obviously very busy working, and so it's great to have this time out in community on a Sunday to come together. Representative Daniel Nguyen, my past colleague here on the Lake Oswego City Council, our Senate President Rob Wagner, former member of the Lake Oswego School Board, and Representative Jules Walters, the former mayor of West Linn. It's great this year we have these representatives all coming from the local community, all past local representatives, now working very hard at the state level. I also want to recognize some other local elected officials I see in the room. My fellow Mayor Denise McGriff from Oregon City. We have West Linn's Mayor Roy Bielatoski. West Linn City Councilor Mary Baumgartner. I see Metro Councilor Garrett Rosenthal. We have my colleague on the City Council, John Windland. My colleague, Councilor Messen Umboop. Liz Hartman, our Director of the Chamber and Lake Oswego School Board. And Senator Wagner's wife, Laura. And John Wallen, School Board, see you as well. And Lori Cremona Wagner from the PCC Board. Yes, don't worry, we don't forget. And Linda Brown from the Clackamas CSD. Did I miss anyone else? Okay, very good. All right. Okay. Well, we're just going to jump right in here. As I mentioned, all of these, there's a lot of new representatives, legislators this year. We have a new governor, we have a new Senate president, we have a new Speaker of the House, and we have many first-term representatives, including Representative Walters and Representative Nguyen. So I thought we'd just take a moment for each of them to tell us what committees they are serving on and what legislation has been a priority for them this session. And we'll start with Representative Nguyen.
Great. Well, thank you, Mayor Buck. It's what a pleasure to be back in this room. I've learned so much working with Councilor Buck and Messen, Councilor Umboop, and my council colleagues, John Windland here. It's just what an honor to be back in this room with everybody here. Again, my name is Daniel Nguyen. I am a state representative for House 338, which covers Lake Oswego, most of Lake Oswego, and parts of Southwest Portland in Multnomah County. Again, I'm a newbie as well as Representative Jules. The committees I'm assigned on right now, I'm actually quite surprised. I actually have 5 committees as a freshman. But I'm really honored to be able to be part of these committees, and because there's things that certainly are things that I'm very passionate about. One of the committees is small business and economic development. Another one is revenue, the dollars and cents of things, how we collect state revenues. Along with that too, I'm also there's a joint committee with the House and Senate side on tax expenditures. I'm also on the semiconductor committee, which is a brand new committee specifically focused on helping the state to be able to come up with a strategy to be able to pull down some federal funding for companies here in Oregon to retain companies here and also support new investments here in Oregon to promote more economic development, also jobs and all the things that come with that. And then I also serve on the Joint Ways and Means Subcommittee on Public Safety. So within that committee, we oversee 17 different public agencies with I think a combined budget of, I don't know how many billions of dollars, but it touches many different things. And so certainly I would say that it's definitely been a lot of learning, a steep learning curve, but I think that having spent time here on the City Council, it's given me a lot of that broad range experience. So it's certainly a lot of information to absorb, but also we have also a lot of people that are very knowledgeable. I'm so blessed to be able to have 60 members on the House side and also 30 members on the Senate side that are really subject matter experts on all things. And I know that being in the building and being able to knock on somebody's door and say, hey, can I have 5 minutes or 10 minutes of your time, and say, what do you know about this topic? And that just has been what a blessing. I think that I couldn't imagine doing this job remotely, and I know that some of us in some of the House and the Senate side have started doing remotely, and so my hat's off to those that have been able to navigate that very difficult time. But with that, that's kind of where I'm at. Some bills that I'm very much focused on is House Bill 3294. I want to thank Mr. Kopig for bringing that to my attention. And it really is a bill that really seeks to address some of the gross language, the racist language in our property deeds. And I just am so glad that we are able to pass the House unanimously, and now it's on the Senate side. And so I hope that my colleagues will be able to bless that and move it to the governor's desk. And then there's another one that I also want to be also working on is a community center for Vietnamese Americans. As you may know, that my family comes from Vietnam, and diversity, equity, inclusion, it was something that I was very much focused on in my time during in the city here, and I want to be able to continue that and be able to bring some more visibility, and also make sure that we provide resources to help make sure that everybody in our communities are able to participate. And there's other things that we'll talk about, sure, that will come up in the conversation, but I wanted to pass this along to Senator Wagner.
Thanks. Thank you. What do you think? Oh, there we go. All right. Well, thank you all for being here on a Sunday afternoon. I can tell the Trailblazers did not make it to the playoffs, because otherwise people would have been home in their sweatpants like watching the Blazers. But in terms of a little bit of an overview, I see some familiar faces, but there's some people I don't know as well, which is great. I represent Senate District 19 in the state Senate, and for folks that may not know kind of the geographic boundaries, post-redistricting, I have the two best state representatives that make up my, gotta play to the audience. House District 38, which is Representative Nguyen's district, starts all the way up through the south waterfront, so up to the Ross Island Bridge. If you know where the tram goes up, you know, it's all of John's Landing. It comes down, picks up Dunthorpe and some communities in southwest Portland, and then all of Lake Oswego down to River Grove. And then I'll let Representative Walters kind of describe the southern part of the district in House District 37. But it's been an incredible honor for me to be able to serve in the legislature the last 5 years. I was appointed when Richard Devlin, who'd been in the legislature for over 20 years, stepped aside to a new job. In 2018, won re-election, ran in 2022. And this is my first legislative session after 20 years. Peter Courtney was the Senate president, and I was incredibly honored the second week of January to have an opportunity to be elected as the next state Senate president. And in terms of what that job entails, I kind of wrote down a couple notes. I'm a little bit of a train conductor. I do air traffic control. I'm a mediator. I'm a coach. And often about this time in session, when a lot of the bills aren't going, I'm a therapist. So people can come and talk about the legislature. You know, the one thing that we have to do every 2 years is we have to balance the state budget. So that's constitutional. Unlike what you see at the federal government, we can't deficit spend. And I know cities are in the same situation. School districts have to account. Sometimes you have reserves and things you can dip into, but ultimately you're responsible to the voters to make sure that the budget is balanced. On top of that, we set the policy framework in a lot of different areas that a lot of you care deeply about, whether or not that's the environment or I wrote down a couple. Just, you know, you walk down the hallway during a legislative session, it's really dynamic and fun, because you'll go committee room to committee room to committee room, and you're seeing our members in committee talking about education issues and housing issues and the environment and public safety and revenue and a lot of ways and means work, trying to figure out how we're going to balance the budget. There have been over 2,000 bills that legislators have brought forward this legislative session, and we are at the time in session right now that pretty much all the House and Senate policy bills have already received their hearings in their respective chambers. And if they were going to move, which about 80% of them don't, they have to go a couple different places. They either go down to Ways and Means, which is a series of joint committees where we determine whether or not we have the resources to fund individual priorities, or they pass the floor. We've passed in the Senate over 209 bills right now, and something that doesn't necessarily get reported on a lot in the media is that of those bills that have passed, 95.2% of them are bipartisan. And in the Senate, we have over 75% of the bills, if there's 30 state senators that have 25 or more votes coming across. So I'm really proud of the fact that by and large, people do really try to work together to try to work from rural Oregon. I was just down in Roseburg last night for part of a regional Ways and Means, a budget hearing, and it was really dynamic hearing the community members there. So I guess the last thing I'll say, and I'll turn it over to Representative Walters here, is these forums are really valuable for us. I want to recognize my staff who is also here, who make it possible for me to be able to do this job. If you could stand up. So Mackenzie Worthington, who is my legislative aide this legislative session. And Connor Radnovich is our communications director in the Office of the Senate President. And then I'm just blessed with really dedicated public servants who step forward and try to communicate. But as much as we're here to kind of answer questions, I know there's some grouping that we've gone through, seen some similar themes. Please know that this is the time and session that we want your ideas to reach out to us, especially around things that you feel around the budget or should be really prioritized. Last thing I'll say, I promise, is the budget is really hard this year. Really, really hard. When we went through the pandemic, the federal government stepped in with multiple different packages that helped states and local communities. And it was a giant wave of resources that now are receding. It was a lot of one-time funds that are pulling back. I said it's kind of a wave on the beach, and what we have left is a lot of like crab bones and little rocks and things like that. So we have to figure out how to balance that all. And the state government in general, if you look at what we do, we either hire people that care for people, or we raise resources to help our local communities support the work that they do to care for people. And when you are seeing declining resources from the federal government, it means that we have less resources to be able to put into the people that are doing that work. So it's going to be some really tough conversations, but again, we really want to hear from you about what your key priorities are to help us determine where we should put the resources. Representative Walters.
Thank you, Senate President. Hi, I'm Jules Walters. I'm the representative for House District 37, which is Westland, Tualatin, River Grove, and Durham, and a little bit of Lake Grove area down sort of near 24 Hour Fitness and in that sort of area. So it's a great district, very, very varied, great people, great businesses. We have Lamb Research, which is one of the largest employers in the area, doing great work on our semiconductor industry. So that's a great thing to have here in our district. I don't know why I'm nervous. All of a sudden I'm nervous, but anyway, I'm just gonna say hi first of all. Introduce my Chief of Staff, Michelle, is in the back, and then I have a few. Yes, she's wonderful. She helped me on my campaign, and she's been working really hard in the office. So great team member. Glad to have her. Also, my mom is here. So, Mom, you get to wave.
That's why you're nervous.
I know, that's why I'm nervous, because my mom is here. She lives in Tualatin, so she's a constituent and a parent, which is doubly challenging. I told her she wasn't allowed to ask any questions today. And my husband, Joe, who's notorious for asking me questions at town halls, has also been warned not to ask a question. And my oldest daughter, Madison, is here, who represents United Food and Commercial Workers Union Local 555. So thank you all for being here. I have some great bills coming through. It's a very busy time. I'm really learning the landscape. I'm sit on most of the committees with Rep. Nguyen, which is great because he has so much knowledge. Also so grateful that we have legislators here that all have that local lens, so we can bring it to Salem and say, that's a great idea, but that's not gonna work here, and here's why. And let's tweak it so that it will work for everybody, for all communities, which I think is really helpful, because sometimes it's hard to make decisions for the entire state of Oregon because we're so diverse and so varied. So we really need those local leadership positions in there to help guide the conversations. And so Rep. Nguyen and I are both on the Joint Committee for Revenue. I'm the vice chair, and also joint tax expenditure, which they kind of tie together. So the tax expenditure parts have just started meeting as we move forward through the session. So we're both learning a lot about how the money flows in and flows out of the coffers in our state government, and it's really been a very interesting education. And I'm really enjoying learning from that. We also sit on economic development and small businesses, which is great. I owned a small business in California. I was a baker and a caterer, so I owned my own bakery, which was really exciting and fun, and also a lot of work, but I still miss it. And then Daniel, of course, is an entrepreneur himself, so I really look to him and Chair Bynum to guide us in a lot of those conversations. It's been a really interesting committee. And then my final one is another financial related one, which is Joint Ways and Means for General Government. So that's when all the different governmental agencies come up to us and basically explain their budget to us and make the ask of what they need for this session. So really learning a lot about how the money flows is how I would describe the work that I'm doing. But the bills I wanted to touch on really quickly, I have a couple that I wanted to mention. One is directly tied to right here, which is the Recovery High School Harmony Academy. I don't know if anybody in here is familiar with it. This is work that Senate President started along with my predecessor, Rachel Prusak, and a great group of very, very, very wonderful advocates who said, you know what, we have a substance use disorder issue with our kids here in the state of Oregon. We need to find a place where they can be in treatment for substance use disorder and finish high school. So they developed the Harmony Academy, which is currently operating as a charter school, where kids can go and continue to get treatment and be in a cohort of students that all are sharing the same struggle. So there's no stigma, they're together, they're in a nurturing environment, and they're also working on their diploma so that they can, once they recover, further in their journey of recovery, they can go out and get jobs and start their careers. And I just think it's wonderful. So we have the bill going through to turn that into a statewide program. I think it's one tool in the toolkit for Oregon. We know our numbers on substance use disorder are disgraceful, and we really need to be working hard. So this is one tool in the toolkit. It really supports our kids. So I'm very proud to be a chief sponsor of that bill. I'm also looking forward to next week. We are going to be voting on reproductive health care rights and gender affirming health care rights, which I think are essential human rights. So I'm looking forward to an aye vote on that, on House Bill 2002. And finally, I'm a co-chief sponsor on House Bill 2605, which is regarding local journalism. So here in Lake Oswego and Westland, Tualatin, we're all very lucky that we have local newspapers and we have local reporters covering the stories that happen here in City Hall and in our community. Most places across the state and across the country don't have that anymore. So people aren't getting the information they need to have the conversations that they need to have to make sure that their communities are thriving and that governments are operating in a transparent manner. So we're providing one-time grants to fund newsrooms around the state so that everybody's getting that local journalism opportunity, which studies show help cut in half some of that bipartisan divisive language, and people are getting the full range of ideas and understanding of what's going on in their government so they can come to the table and have really honest, frank discussions. So I'm very excited about that as a journalism major, and I'm working my master's degree in strategic communication at the Agora Journalism School at University of Oregon, who is partnering on this legislation. So it's really exciting. And I'll leave it at that. I want to make sure we have time to answer your questions. So thank you.
Thank you, Representative Walters. As a further, shout out to Harmony Academy, there's a lot of talk about, Measure 110 and its effectiveness. So one positive example of the impact Measure 110 is having is a lot of that funding, or it's an example of funding that does go. Harmony Academy is a big recipient of those dollars for youth who are afflicted with substance abuse disorder at a very young age. And that program is doing fantastic work right here in our community. I'm so happy to hear that it's a program that could expand statewide. It's desperately needed. So one big issue, a lot of you, thank you very much to everyone who's submitting questions right now. And a lot of you submitted questions in advance as well, so we had a chance to assimilate some of them into some of these themes. We want to make sure everyone gets a chance to have their questions heard. A big topic is housing. I know it's been a top priority for the governor and for the legislature. Start of session, the governor's calling to issue $1 billion in bonds to build more affordable housing. In addition to building more market rate housing, we know that subsidized housing is needed to ensure affordability for our lowest income residents. Now, in the metro area, we've seen great success in the use of Metro Housing Bond funds that's bringing affordable housing to nearly every corner of the region, including to Lake Oswego. What are tangible steps that the state is taking this session to improve, continue improving housing access and affordability? Which one of you wants to take that? Okay. Okay.
So as you can imagine, this is the topic that everybody is talking about right now, both in terms of systemic and persistent houselessness and homelessness, the wraparound supports that are needed for people that are facing addiction, as well as just housing affordability and where are we in trying to build additional housing across the region that is accommodating the people that have both moved here or people that are wanting to age in place, as well as, people. I've 4 kids and, they have to live somewhere. Although Lori and I guess they could just, live at home forever, but that's not ideal for us. The legislature this session, in partnership with the governor, and here's a special little trick if you're looking at bills either in the newspaper or if you're on something called the Oregon Legislative Information System, which is our OLIS. It's really very approachable. You can find out where bills are. If they're low in the bill stack, as we call it, so House Bill 2001 through 2010, that means that it's a priority for the speaker. And if it's a low bill number in the Senate, so Senate Bills 1 through 9, it's a priority for the Senate President's office, and it's something that we really try to up-level. And the first 2 bills that you see that we took wide bipartisan action on were housing and jobs. And I'll let Representative Nguyen and Rep. Walters talk about this too. House Bill 2001 was the omnibus housing affordability package that we were trying to push resources across the state to try to address systemic homelessness. Really, it was shelters and trying to provide additional wraparound supports in partnership with our local communities. We know that we kind of have to provide that Band-Aid. And then also it sets up a housing affordability council that looks at production and what are we going to do long-term in terms of how are we bringing additional units online. It was the first time that I'm aware that the legislature went so bold so early in session on a signature initiative like this, and I was really proud of the fact that it was widely bipartisan. The people that set it up, we set it up with, on our side of the building, was Senator Casey Jama, as well as the vice chair of the committee, who was Dick Anderson from the coast, a Republican, and they came together and really worked with the Republican and the House member on the other side to come up, Maxine Dexter, and I think it was, who was the vice chair? Oh, it was Jeff Helfrich from the Gorge. And they came up with, just working with the governor's office, a really great cross-section of strategies and proposals that are right now, because it was something called an emergency clause on it. It's actually in the process of getting money out to local communities to help with houselessness. So that's kind of phase 1. Phase 2 is really trying to get upstream on addressing housing stock and affordability. And that's going to take resources. I think you mentioned that the governor has set a very ambitious target for $1 billion. She hasn't necessarily identified the revenue that lines up with that, and we have a lot of mouths to feed in the legislature. So we are having good conversations with the governor. I think that you will see that there'll be a significant investment in this space. I'm not sure we'll get all the way to $1 billion, but it's definitely, we're going to continue to move the needle. And again, we need your feedback on thoughts and creative ideas on how we're going to get there. You want to?
Sure. Thank you. That's exactly right. And I really appreciate the governor's drive on this. We know right now in the state of Oregon, we are without 144,000 units of housing that people need to be housed. So there's a lot of work to be done. It takes time to find the space to do that, to find the contractors, to start building. So we really need to be just pushing forward as much as we can to make sure that everybody has the basic human right, which is to have a roof over your head, to have shelter. I think some people get nervous when we talk about affordable housing. What does that look like? I just want to share that my 2 adult daughters share an apartment in Beaverton. No offense, Maddie, but it's not super fancy. It's a 2-bedroom, 1-bathroom, and it's over $2,000 a month, almost $2,300 a month, which is shocking to me, really. And I grew up in California, so I'm used to high rent prices, but that is just so much of a burden for 2 young adults to try and move out of their home, their parents' home, and live on their own. You have to be making some pretty significant money. So affordable housing isn't necessarily like some sort of, subsidized project, or it's basically just building units that people can afford to live in while they're working and making working in family wage jobs and making the money to pay rent. So I'm really excited. I think Lake Oswego has done a great job in the last, I don't know, Joe, how long do you think? At least 5 years on diversifying your housing stock, which is amazing. West Lynn has a ways to go, but I know that the mayor here and council president are working hard to make sure that we start building more multi-unit family homes. And even things like quadplexes and cottage clusters. Cottage clusters are great. They're just several cottages on one larger piece of property. There's a common space in the middle. People can socialize in the middle. Often they're just one level, so they're great for seniors who are maybe aging out of their own home and have a nice place to live, and also great for young families. So I think that just being open to all of those ideas, keep supporting the governor in this move, making sure that those houses are built efficiently to lessen environmental impacts. All of these are key, important issues to us, and I'm really excited about the work. And I'll pass it on to the mayor.
Thank you. Well, I have a question here specific for Representative Nguyen.
Oh,
and
hey,
that's
Joe, can I say one more thing?
Of course.
I know, I'm sorry, I'm jumping on it. There's a bill that we introduced, it's really quick. It's called Senate Bill 2. And it's me and Senator Tim Knopp, who's the Republican leader from Bend. And it's advancing a program called Home Share Oregon. Right now, there's 1.3 million bedrooms in the state of Oregon. And what this does is it works with this community nonprofit that Homer Williams started just a couple years ago to try to incent people to think about opening their homes, especially if you're thinking about, it's not necessarily just somebody, coming off the street, but it could be somebody who's working, a student, or just thinking about shared housing. How can people live together? So we're really excited about trying to advance home share. So just wanted to put that out there.
I think Barbara wants me to be her home share partner. Well, no, and Mr. Williams is doing a great job spreading this program. In fact, we have our 50+ advisory board. He came here to the city, and we're talking about how we can better integrate it into the Lake Oswego community. I mean, along the lines of housing, real quick, this for Representative Nguyen. I mean, a big issue here in Clackamas County is we see the dire need for housing. There was an opportunity for a big motel conversion in Clackamas that would have provided 100 units of transition housing. Someone here in the audience has asked this question: is there anything that can be done to remediate the county commissioner's reversal decision on Project Turnkey? And I think this comes to a good question about how we all work together, cities, the county, and the state. But can you maybe address this resident's question about the Project Turnkey?
Certainly, thank you, Mayor Buck. Certainly, that's something that I think is very much part of this strategy, right? We've talked about House Bill 2001. That really, House Bill 2001 is just a down payment. It's just a kind of just to get it started. But in addition to that, we've also got to make sure we've got to involve our local partners too. We've got the state involved, we've got our cities involved, we'd also have our county partners involved too. I think in this case here, we've got a decision that was made by the county commission. And I think that sometimes we as communities, we've got to be able to make sure that we all remind that we've got to work together as a team. This isn't something that we can be solved independently by one city, by one state agency or one county. We've got to work together. And so we've got to be able to encourage our county leaders also to be on the same team. It's not perfect. Certainly, if we're waiting for something that's perfect, it's never going to come along. I think that that's something that we've got to keep moving ahead. We've got to figure out what to do, because I think among the in this between the House districts and the Senate district here, in my district, half my district is in Multnomah County, and half my district also includes the city of Portland, and we see the effects of houselessness very vividly. Sometimes here in Lake Oswego, we don't see the visible signs as much, but certainly it is something that is very, very important to be able to address in the city of Portland, because as I'm finding more and more, I think that in the State House and in the Capitol building, we recognize that if we have a city of Portland that is quite frankly, failing, then it impacts all corners of the state. The resiliency and the recovery of our state of Oregon depends on the success of the city of Portland as well. So while city of Portland may not be in everybody's district, it's all in our common interest. And so I think that things like you know, the shelter that's in Clackamas County, although it's not in the city of Portland, it impacts the whole region. So I think as a community, we need to be able to make sure that we, quite frankly, hold our feet to the fire and be able to recognize that we've got to be partners in this. And so that's some of the things I was thinking about. But on the topic about housing, again, one last comment I wanted to add the conversation, all that Senator Wagner and Representative Walters had brought up, is that, you know, as the governor said, the goal is to be able to create 36,000 new houses each year. That's going to take, that's a heavy lift. That's something that's going to require also cooperation in terms of how do we look at our land supply too, and that's going to be a continuing conversation too about how do we address where we're going to put all these homes, where we're going to put all these the people that are moving to the state potentially, especially when we have some major investments coming down the pipeline with Senate Bill 4 with the semiconductor investments coming in. We've also got to be thinking about also the housing for the workforce as well too. So it's a big topic.
And that leads right into the next question for you, which is there's been a lot of news coverage on semiconductors and the need to increase production here in Oregon. How does that benefit us locally?
Well, gosh, I think that, you know, from the standpoint of, again, just from the standpoint of the jobs, I think that oftentimes we think about jobs as in just, you know, creating income for people, individuals, but it creates income for the state, you know, because all those people that are coming in, the employee pays payroll taxes to the state, which goes directly to the general fund, as well as the employers that employ those people. Those also go to the goes to the general fund to help to fund all of our programs here. So I think that that's something that that we need to make sure that we are also thinking about too, to encourage investments to happen here and also create the housing that's going to be also to be able to fund that. And on the housing part, every house, every apartment, every living space is going to also generate property taxes too, which go to fund our state revenues, also schools and all the public safety things that we want to be support, as well as all the programs that we need as a state. So all in all, I think that that's something that we need to be highly aware of. One thing I forgot to mention too is I also serve on the work group for the tax credits, which is another Senate bill, Senate Bill 5, as Senator Wagner said. It's, you know, 4 and 5 are priorities of the Senate. And so those are things that we're working actively to thinking about. How do we also make sure that we address the needs of our communities by investing in, by attracting that investment so that we invest in housing. So it's all interrelated, housing, economic development, jobs.
And I will just say that Representative Nguyen is giving himself short shrift a little bit here. He's been spending every Monday and Wednesday night at the state capitol working long hours on a committee that we set up around a joint committee from the House and the Senate, bipartisan, around semiconductors. And if folks probably you've been reading about this or seen it in the media, but Senator Wyden worked with our national, huge bipartisan support, establishing something called the CHIPS Act. It passed last August. And the federal government is so good. They always come up with these things with these great acronyms. And then in the state, like we come up with like, you know, FISRVRA, you know, like it's like just a bunch of consonants that like go together. I'm like, what is this? Sasa? I'm like, I don't know what that is. State School Fund. But it's creating helpful incentives to produce semiconductors and Science Act of 2022. And Oregon is uniquely situated, not just in the nation, but in the world, in terms of what we have with the Silicon Forest. And the impact that we've seen with Mentor Graphics, you know, originally, and then, you know, HP down in Hillsborough, and then Intel, right? And then all the different businesses spin out from that. So I've heard people with like, why are we spending $200 million to be able to leverage? We are going to leverage billions of resources from the federal government and in additional job opportunities for people. And it is people moving in. It's just kind of a, you know, on the R&D side, you probably see pretty highly educated class, but it's also jobs for the future for our kids who are, you know, living and working here. I mean, I think what's so great about the framework of the federal legislation is that in order to receive resources from the federal government, as part of their notice for funding opportunity, you have to have a commitment to your local community to grow your local workforce training. You have to be investing in childcare. You have to be investing in higher ed. So it's not just, let's just provide a bunch of federal cash to corporations and walk away. It is supposed to be targeted to try to help our communities move forward. And Oregon, I'm really excited. You can tell I'm excited. But I wanted to give a shout out to Daniel for the great work he's doing. This Wednesday night, actually, we did put out Senate Bill 5, which is looking at tax credits, really highly targeted to help work with the semiconductor industry to try to help put those packages together to try to bring that federal money in here.
Just quickly, I went on a tour of the Lamb Research Facility with Representative Neron and Senator Woods. Really great work that they're doing there. I can't exactly tell you exactly what it is that they do, but it's very fascinating. Anyway, one of their programs is they hire kids directly out of high school. So kids with a high school diploma can be hired to work in these clean rooms and make $30 an hour plus benefits. That's a really big deal. I think it's a great opportunity. They're trying to train kids in high school as early as middle school to start getting ready to work in this industry. The biggest struggle they're having right now is finding workers. They have to go all the way down the I-5 corridor past Eugene to get people to come commute to Wilsonville and Tualatin to work in these jobs, because we just don't have the housing stock available that's affordable for them to live in. So it is all interconnected. And I don't know, Daniel, if you feel like telling the story, but he told the most compelling story about when Intel first opened and your family working. Do you mind sharing that story?
Sure. Well, certainly I was, yeah. So semiconductors isn't just about making computer chips and making high-tech advancements and things like that, but it's also the Main Street businesses too. I think the story I shared was that when I was sitting in the semiconductor committee, I didn't make the connection until sitting there. It struck me that one of the food carts we had was actually on the Intel construction site. That was on the D1X facility. This was about 10 years ago. But we were selling breakfast items and selling noodles and soups and things to the construction workers that were there. So there was a steady routine. We know exactly when the steam fitters have their breaks, when the electricians would come out. And so we knew, but that's also the kind of the ripple effects. We talk about in the Act, it talks about spillover benefits. And spillover benefits is not just the high-tech, the R&D research, it's also the Main Street businesses that will emerge around all that will go to support the construction workers that will be working on those sites. By the way, it's continuous. It's a constant construction site, because as soon as they finish one, the next fab that they finished 10 years ago is ready to be updated. And so the more fabs that we have, more facilities we have here, it just keeps the building trades and keeps those types of jobs keep going. We had very compelling also a testimony from some people of color and some women that were typically not commonly seen in the building trades, and for them to be able to get an apprenticeship and be able to have access to these really high-paying jobs. I think Chair Bynum was saying, well, where do I apply? Because some of these, some of the really six figures with just some training on the job is really, really important. So I think that, again, this is one of those things where CHIPS isn't just about high tech, it's also about Main Street. It's about the business that will emerge around to support all the residents that will be coming to work these facilities.
Thank you all so much. One of the, now that we're all warmed up, we had a lot of questions now and before come in on tolling, a big topic here in Clackamas County. And one question came in that I think summarized all of the different ones pretty well, so I'm going to read that one. Over the past several years, our local governments and community members have been engaged with ODOT regarding the tolling of I-205 and the impending region-wide pricing congestion model. Since that time, cities, the county, and residents have given troves of on-the-ground input and technical feedback to ODOT, only to have very little, if any of it, incorporated into the go-forward plans. Many community members understand the need for funding. They simply want funding implemented in a way that's fundamentally fair and equitable and will produce the desired results. In response to concerns, legislators have introduced a variety of bills responsive to these concerns. However, thus far, there's been a resistance to the calls for public hearings before the legislature. The Joint Transportation Committee chair has announced that all bills introduced on tolling are effectively dead. As the representatives for communities directly impacted by tolling, what do you see as a proper response to the myriad of valid objections raised by local officials, subject matter experts, and residents? Who wants to start?
Okay.
Okay, yeah.
And we're at time. No, no, as you can imagine, we get a lot of emails and we get a lot of phone calls. Mackenzie gets a lot of emails. Mackenzie gets a lot. And in our region, as you can imagine, given the impact, the fact that 205 runs through House District 37, starts at North Wilsonville all the way through 205 to the Abernathy. I've often said that Senate District 19 is sort of the bottleneck district. We start at the Twilliger Curves, we go down to the 217 interchange, down to 205, we run 205 to the Abernathy, and then we run up 43 on the, so it's one of the spoils of having a great place to live is that, people also commute and move to jobs. In 2017, it was the last time the state passed a large transportation package. And part of the negotiation, I came in 2018, so I wasn't part of this conversation. But part of that package was looking at declining gas tax revenue, which funds the State Highway Trust Fund. And when you do a really good job in terms of hybrids and electric vehicles, and you want to try to keep gas taxes down because it's a declining source of revenue to be able to fund road repair and bridge repair, you have to start looking at what are you doing around funding critical investment for our transportation infrastructure. So the bill addressed in 2017 the idea of bringing tolling as a component for bridge replacement, highway construction, with the kind of projects that you saw identified and people have been talking about. It was sort of recodified back in 2020 with another piece of legislation at that time. And then now ODOT has kind of picked it up and started to go forward. And now we're really hearing from our constituents about what does this mean? What does it mean in terms of congestion? What does it mean in terms of mitigation in our local roads? What are we doing around safety? I'm pointing at the local mayors over here because they've been so actively engaged and vocal on behalf of their constituencies. What's the cost going to be? How are you dealing with low-income residents? What are you doing around trying to get people out of their cars as it relates to tolling? Why are you tolling 205 first and the Abernathy? Why are you treating us like guinea pigs for a regional highway, conversation around trying to bring this as fee revenue to try to fund our roads? And so these are all legitimate questions. And I will just say, I don't think we're not, because of what we're receiving from constituents, I don't think it's set that that I don't think ODOT has done a very good job answering those questions for our communities. I usually try not to throw people in public service under the bus, under the bus, under the bridge. We don't
have those. We don't have buses here. So.
Yeah, if we actually had TriMet that served our communities. But I think that this conversation is not done. And that's what I'm hearing. Do you want to talk about the framework legislation that you've just introduced? Okay.
So I feel the same frustration that everybody else does around tolling. I live in West Lynn, right near the 10th Street exit. So I know what traffic looks like every afternoon of people already getting off I-205 at Stafford Road and cutting through our neighborhoods. And I know that they come up and over Stafford and down into Lake Oswego as well. So we're all feeling it. Tualatin's backed up, Borland Road is backed up, Wilsonville. People get off at Aurora to drive through Canby to go up Oregon 99E and through Mayor McGriff's historic Main Street every afternoon. And it's gridlock, and it's just going to get worse. The study that they just released to us shows that. It is empirical. They have no plan to mitigate for that increased diversion, not one idea. So we walked into the legislature, several of us, Representative Hartman, who represents Gladstone in Oregon City, Representative Neron, who's in Wilsonville, Tualatin, Tigard. Many of us introduced different pieces of legislation that we wanted to see go through to help. And some of them were as extreme as like no tolling period. Mine's kind of in the middle of like, if this is going to go forward, we need to make sure that some of these dollars come back to our local community so that we can take care of our local roads. Also, to put a cap on how many tolls you're allowed to charge our local citizens to use the tolling gantries, so that we're not paying out of pocket. I've heard the estimate on I-205 from Wilsonville to the state line is $30 round trip in tolling. I do not know how the average worker is going to pay that. I don't know how the average person on a fixed income who's trying to get to the doctor is going to pay that. I don't know how you're going to pay it 5 days a week. I don't know how you're going to pay it 1 day a week. It's excessive. And I'm just, it was,
I don't know where you came up with that.
it's not just Abernathy and it's not just they're going to toll all the way up I-205. So the eventual plan is that there will be gantries from after the Stafford exit, which is the first problem, because that's where everybody's going to get off to avoid the tolls. That's why the diversion is increasing. And they will toll all the way up I-205 to the state line. And that number was $30. If you take their projected toll number, which is between $2 and $4, and you multiply that times the number of gantries, and then round trip, it's $30. So it's a lot of money. It's a lot of money for our workers. So I'm really disappointed that the bills are still studying transportation. I was really encouraged to learn last week that the Senate President is going to join the Joint Transportation Committee. And so I know he is very smart, strategic. He knows this area, and I'm sure we can find ways to mitigate some solutions that work for everyone. But in the meantime, ODOT's not listening, and they're not listening to us, and they're not listening to you, and that needs to change. So that's our first order of business. They're not listening to Metro. They're not listening to our local leaders. It's very, very frustrating. So, yeah, that's right. They haven't. It's codified in the law from House Bill 2017. But there are some pieces in the omnibus bill, House Bill 3055, which passed in 20 short session, about how they need to address the mitigation piece on diversion. So I'm hoping there's some levers in there that can be pulled so that we can help solve what potentially could be a boondoggle. And if we're trying to make a regional mobility plan for the entire region, we need to make sure that what happens here first doesn't stymie that. If people look at I-205 and say, this is a mess, we don't want this all over the place, then we may not even get the interstate bridge replacement plan going because people won't want to fund it. So there is a lot of work to be done.
Thank you, Representative Walters. One thing I wanted to add to that conversation too is I think that, just this past week we've heard there was a bill, somebody's priority bill that came through, and I think that what we're getting at basically is just we've got to slow the process down. So this bill that's coming through as a priority bill is a moratorium. Particularly a moratorium that basically slows down the process. And let's make sure we spend 2 years to make sure that we understand where the funding is coming from, make sure it's fair and it's equitable, and also how it's going to be spent. And so those are things I think we've got to be able to kind of zoom out to. Essentially what we're talking about here is where we can get the money to do things we want to do. And that's just not in transportation only, but in other areas too, with education, with public safety, with all these different things. So again, one of these things that Representative Walters and I are learning very quickly is that funding and revenue is really at the core of these things. And so if we really talk about tolling, what it is, it's basically money to pay for this transportation system that needs to be addressed and fixed. And so that's something that I'm really hoping that we've got, some new faces in the legislature here, and to ask these tough questions and be able to ask, and not be afraid to be able to ask the House questions of our agencies that are in charge of these these plans. And so that's something I think that we as a community can make sure that we encourage our legislators to say, hey, let's take some more time, let's slow down and not just rush headlong into something that we may regret in the future. So I think time is important. We're limited in time in terms of how much time we have in the legislature, but I think that in this case here, I think it's wise that we kind of slow down and really take a deep dive and to look at what is going to be best, not only in the short term, but also in the long term as well.
Yeah, that's right. So that bill is being sponsored by Representative Nguyen, Representative Hartman, and myself. We're planning on dropping it, I believe, next week. It doesn't have a bill number yet, but when it does, I'll make sure that we do good outreach so everybody knows what it is and you can share your thoughts on it with your legislators.
Well, as someone who's been joined by all these residents and my elected colleagues in advocating on this topic, weighing in for the past several years, I just want to appreciate you three for the words that you've just spoken here today, really validating a lot of the concerns. I think that makes me, and I'm sure many others in this room, really feel heard. You have a good understanding of the issue before us, and we appreciate the action that you're carrying, and know that all of us are here to support you. It's a difficult topic. We know that not everyone in the region is on the same page. In Clackamas, I think we're all on the same page, but elsewhere in the region, we're not necessarily on the same page. So we're here to back you up in whatever way necessary, and thank you all for your support on this topic.
I told Joe if this goes upside down, we're just going to start talking about pickleball. So
Moving on. Well, here's a question that came in from a resident in Westland. The Federal Inflation Reduction Act will bring $370 billion into American communities, bringing about a clean, green economy, millions of jobs, and has the potential to impact every household in the United States. It will take local initiatives to bring those dollars into our communities. What strategies will you take to ensure our district residents understand the benefits of this program to save them money, make their homes healthier and safer against erratic and more extreme weather?
Talk about climate change.
Oh,
sure.
Yes,
Okay.
and climate change, many people
yeah.
wrote on.
No, I mean, so
various
I obviously this is the conversation around climate change, global warming. This is, you talk to my kids, this is the existential issue of our humanity right now across this globe. And in Oregon, you can imagine we're 4.2 million people. We're 1.5% of the state, the US population. We're a tiny little bit of the world population, but there's things that we can do locally and in our state and obviously at the federal level to try to think about how we're addressing global climate change. We have the Global Warming Commission in the state of Oregon, and this is following on the action from Governor Brown with the executive order trying to look at setting targets for carbon reduction in the state, and it's addressing every sector of the industry. So it's, what are we doing around production? So how are we bringing on more solar and wind? What are we doing around looking at our housing? And there's 4 different bills this legislative session that's going to look at housing efficiency. What are we doing around wildfire prevention? Because when you have a bunch of trees in a federal forest that go up, you're losing that carbon capture there too, let alone the negative impacts that we're going to see as the West heats up. The federal government in passing the IGA, the IRA, has set an incredible opportunity for us to leverage significant resources. Right now, the governor's office is really trying to figure out how to leverage those dollars, and we're catching up to it a little bit at the legislative level. I think that for us, it's a little bit not getting in the way of that work. It's setting up some systems and structures, making sure that we provide the funding for our different state agencies that are working in this space, and then really trying to figure out if there's resources that we need at the state level to leverage those federal dollars, how can we be a good partner in there. I think the question was around communication, and I'm open to your thoughts on that too.
Well, do you want to say something on that? Okay. There were several questions on, a topic that's come up quite a bit in Lake Oswego is on gas-powered lawn equipment. And we've been talking about this for several years and working to, we have some questions here today. As a city, we've moved our city contractors to work around the city. Representative Nguyen will remember this, to all electric. So they've moved even the big lawnmowers that they use to mow the medians and whatnot. They're doing those with electric sitting lawnmowers, which is great. And we're doing that as a way to help spur the adoption, further adoption of that type of equipment that's needed to really get, especially the commercial side. If you go to a Home Depot, right, if you go to the Home Depot in Tualatin right now, they're pretty much only selling electric lawn care equipment, chainsaws to everything's electric. But at the same time, on the commercial side, we haven't yet quite seen the adoption, and we've struggled here in the local community about how to best move forward outside of setting that good example, like our city parks department is also transitioning. Multnomah County is making those same moves to transitioning their move. Is there anything else that can help spur? I know there's been bills introduced this session, last session, really working, but it seems to move us forward. But it seems like we hear from the commercial side that it's just not quite there yet. It's just the equipment just isn't quite ready for universal adoption by the commercial companies. So can any of you, I don't know if any of you are involved in those committees, but can you?
I mean, the only thing I know about this, I believe there was legislation in California that passed. So if you can imagine, we're 4.2 million, they're 48 million or something like that. They're going to drive the market on this. I think I think somebody introduced legislation on the House side. I'm not sure, but I haven't caught up to the bill number on it. So I mean, yeah. I mean, I'm definitely. The other thing is, there are a lot of people that work in this space, and if you think about two-strokes out there and people that are breathing in fumes all the time, like this is also not a healthy thing for people in terms of their working environment. So. I'm definitely open to hearing more about a solution here, and maybe there's an opportunity to leverage some of that IRA money to pull down in that space.
My comment on that really is, I think that in our communities, I think that people want to do the right thing. They want to be able to address the needs of our community. They want to be able to do that, but its cost is a factor, right? So I think that these are things where I think that that we as a state, potentially, just as much as we incentivize electric vehicles, that program has been so successful that we've run out of funds, right? Yeah. And so if we were trying to incentivize the behavior, I think that's where some of the things we can do on the state side, provide some of those tax credits. And back to my favorite subject, tax credits, right? We want to be able to, I think that, as much as we are, quote unquote, lawmakers, right? Sometimes we also need to be thinking about how do we make it possible for us to be able to address the needs this particular interest in this need here. I mean, I think that one of the things we're talking about too, I know that it's still within amendments, but SB 5, we're talking about tax credits that's specifically geared towards semiconductors. But within the work group, we're also talking about too, what about research and development in renewable energy and resources around that. And certainly here in Oregon State University has been a leader in a lot of this technology. So how do we also incentivize that research, and also the startups that are maybe the people that are working, the researchers are working at OSU, let's keep them here. Let's have Oregon become that green energy, that sustainable energy hub also, in addition to semiconductors too. So I think with the CHIPS Act and the IRA, those are also things that we as legislators can also, how do we also position ourselves not only as a leader in that, although we may be small, we would account for 1.5% of the U.S. population, but we're mighty. I think we have something that other states don't have, is we have this infrastructure that's already in place. And so I think we've got to embrace that and really think about how do we become that leader in not just on paper and having the most the legislation to enforce that, but also how do we provide the tools so we can actually get there.
Another question has come in from a resident in Tualatin asking about House Bill 3090. This is the ban on flavored tobacco. I believe this passed the House. Representative Walters, do you have? The question is, what is your stance on the flavored nicotine/tobacco ban?
My stance, well, this is about protecting kids. So I am definitely a yes vote on banning flavored tobacco for vapes. They're packaged, they look like candy. I mean, if you were to set them aside on the shelf, which they do, they look exactly the same. They're highly addictive. They're I don't even know the numbers, so much more addictive than regular cigarettes that kids are getting hooked on them, and they're having a terrible, terrible time putting them down. So teachers have even seen kids just openly vaping in the classroom because they're so addicted to the vape. We know the history of what nicotine and tobacco does to the human body, and they're carcinogenic, they're highly addictive. We need to make sure that we are not providing these, whatever you want to call them, terrible things to our kids. And that's really what's important to me, is protecting the children.
And do you know the status of that? Did that bill pass the House? Yeah.
I don't know if we, did it go to
You
the
guys-
floor yet? Has it gone to the floor?
Out of committee. But
Yeah, I think
Out of
it's,
committee, but not on the floor.
I think it's coming to you this week, head over to us. But, I'm looking at Garrett Kepping here, who we've had several kids come through. Can I share about Zach? I'm looking at my wife, yeah. So we had a 15-year-old in our family who, was a freshman at Lake Oswego High School, and these vape things that look like flash drives, and they're bubblegum flavor and grape flavor and stuff. This is a targeted, industry has been like targeting, trying to get our kids hooked on this stuff. And I'm just looking, because I know in the high schools, like, it's just everywhere right now. And maybe it's cresting a little bit, but I'm excited if the bill comes over that we have an opportunity to vote on it.
It's great. Thank you. It's been a big, just so you know, a big topic here locally. There's a shop that's pretty aggressive about their advertising that opened up near Lake Ridge High School, and residents have been very concerned about that here in Ello. So we appreciate you all moving that legislation forward. An Ello resident has a question on the self-serve gas legislation for the Senate President.
And we're at time. I grew up in Oregon. I understand the tension around this. I think the legislation, has it passed the House? Have you guys? Okay. So it's passed the House. And my understanding is that it requires, you have to have like half the pumps open, or there has to be an attendant there that will help without any additional cost. Rural Oregon is already moving this direction. I have to say that it's always been kind of frustrating for me, just having spent time in other states, the fact that sometimes I'll get to a gas pump and it'll be a really nice day, and you just sit there in your car. Like, I know how to get out of my car and put the little thing in and then pump the thing. And so I do think the fact that I sometimes I would just push the envelope and like get out and start doing it, and they're like, that's a criminal offense. I'm like, we need to decriminalize my ability to pump my own gas. So I know this is like an electric topic. Back in the 20 years ago when I was interning in the state capitol, we get just all these postcards and people feel really, really strongly about it. But I think if you have protections for people and let people know that there's going to be an attendant there to help with people to be able to pump their gas, I'm going to support the bill that comes over.
Okay. Here's a question on gun rights from a Westland resident. How do you, let me see, how are you going to take firearms out of the hands of criminals without infringing with Second Amendment rights for, well, I think it says law-abiding citizens? It's a balance.
You want to start? We got pumping gas, you get guns.
Well, thank you,
Okay,
colleagues. Again, I think that there's some legislation to address specifically, for example, ghost guns. I think that one of the kind of the bad side of technologies now is that we're able to do 3D printing of weapons. I think that's something that I think that is, as we've seen, looking at in Japan, for example, and a country that is, again, violence is not a thing, but they're able to use a weapon to assassinate somebody in high-profile assassination of the prime minister. Just to kind of goes to show that some of these weapons. I mean, if somebody were to have ill intent, these need to be used to create a weapon for one-time use. But we can't track those. We can't regulate those. So those are some of the things where I think that I would believe that those are law-abiding citizens aren't in the. They're not making 3D guns. They're not with intent of single use for one single purpose, and as that to hurt people. And so that's one of the bills that's going to be that we're going to be talking about, and it's already passed the House. It's passed out of committee, so that was something that that's addressing a particular part of gun ownership and things. And so those are some of the part of many other discussions too.
Yeah, I mean, I think what the statistic I saw was something like in the last year in Oregon, 400,000 guns were purchased. People can Google that lifetime right now, but I'm pretty sure the Second Amendment and the protections that we see from the U.S. Supreme Court, both from Heller as well as D.C. as well as New York, nobody's coming at your guns, right? What we have is what can we do around safety protections in this state to try to exactly do what people are saying that we need to do, and that's keeping guns out of the hands of either people that are going to commit self-harm So you see, suicide prevention type measures. And in the last 10 years, the legislature has taken some action. So we've got safe storage legislation. We provided the opportunities, if they so choose, for school districts, and part of the legislation in 2005 would allow other local cities or counties to be able to have gun-free spaces. It's kind of intimidating given the level of rhetoric, not in this community, but you see across the country with local school boards and things. If you think about people coming into that space that can be very, very highly charged, to be able to bring a live firearm. And the Oregon State Capitol, it's been really unfortunate. The fact that, we used to be, now there's security protocols, just like you see in Congress or in a federal court building. We have security now. There was closing the loophole that allowed domestic violence, people that were convicted of domestic violence. It was called the intimate partner or the boyfriend loophole. We closed that. We passed legislation establishing extreme risk protection orders or red flag laws. This legislation, I think that Daniel was talking about, House Bill 2005, is relatively modest, given the conversations happening. The other bill that is out there is Senate Bill 348, and this is helping implement Measure 114, which the voters just passed this last fall. So looking at permit to purchase. So, but I don't know. I think 400,000 guns last year. Washington just passed the assault weapons ban up there. We don't have that up for consideration in Oregon this term.
Yeah, and I would just add that the #1 cause of death for children in America is gun violence. That's a new statistic that's just changed in the last couple of years. That's completely unacceptable. As a society, we just cannot let that happen. So I have signed on to all the gun bills that I could, to make sure that people are trained and licensed and buying them legally and are storing them safely and making sure kids don't have access to weapons that are unlocked and loaded. So I guess that's all I'll add. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you all for your efforts on that. I know as a mayor of a small town, I know what's on my mind is what's on the minds of all our community members, and seeing these headlines just this past week of, kids, the kid that goes down the wrong driveway, and gets shot, the kid that knocks on the wrong door and is shot, the kid that got into the wrong car after school event practice and is shot. I mean, it's astonishing. We obviously all want to be safe in the legislature, we in our public buildings and all that, but golly gee, these folks are just in their neighborhoods doing everyday activities. And this is, of course, nothing new. I mean, communities across this country, in our own metro area, people are facing gun violence just in their everyday activities on a regular basis. And so we appreciate your efforts doing what you can to keep folks safe. And it's a daunting challenge. There's no easy solution. As the senator said, 400,000 guns is a lot. But we appreciate you doing everything you can to keep everyone, especially the kids in the communities, safe. Thank you all. There are some questions, just procedural things. What deadlines are coming for the bills to progress to completion?
Well, as I mentioned in my kind of overview with the train conductor, air traffic control counselor, I'm definitely into like the therapy time where people are coming into my office being like, why didn't my bill go forward? Why did it die? We've passed what's called first chamber deadline. So all the policy bills from the House or the Senate needed to move out of what they're called their committee of origin. And then now all the bills that are coming over from the House to the Senate or going the other way have to be scheduled for what's called a work session. So a public hearing, we publicly hear every bill, so people have an opportunity to come testify on it. And then they have to be scheduled by May 4th to be able to take action on. May 5th, I'm getting yes, thank you, Connor. So by May 5th. And then there's a couple more week period that those bills can be worked. And then, as I mentioned, there is legislation that goes to Ways and Means, which are joint committees where those bills can be considered as well. There are two committees in the Senate. It's the Senate Rules Committee. In the House, it's the House Rules Committee, where a handful of bills that are still waiting, mostly technical amendments, can be kept alive. And sometimes those are, things that are negotiated at the end of session. But we're really, coming up on May, it's happening fast and furious. The big challenge is going to be the budget. So May 17th is the revenue forecast that will determine the budget that we are able to assemble for the next 2 years. And when we know of available resources, that's when the really heavy negotiations happen. And it is daunting. I mean, I'm just going to tell you, when you're talking about housing and healthcare and education and corrections and public defense and everything else, it's going to be heavy. But that's why we need your voice to tell us the things that you want to see prioritized in there.
And in revenue,
Yeah.
we don't have deadlines, so bills that are still in revenue are still alive. And so, rules and revenue are committees where if they're still there, there's still hope. So those that are holding out hope, so.
And a resident has asked what the best way to contact, phone or email. Someone wanted to get in touch. What's the best way for them to contact your offices? Email? Email? Email.
All the staffers say email. Yeah. And you're welcome to call. Yes, please.
Welcome to call, but email is best.
And so, yeah, if you go onto the legislative website, you'll find all of the representatives, office phone numbers and emails and our assistants' emails. You can reach out to us.
Back in the 99 legislative session, I go into the Wayback Machine and then I have to put money into this bucket to be able to fund the Common School Fund because I tell all these stories. But I was a legislative aide, and the person that I work for said, we don't respond to any of this email. We only respond to hard copy letters. So we got all these letters in, and then you have to sit there and type them out on a word processor, stamp them.
Okay, so community engagement has improved then over the decades. Yeah, that's great. So if we didn't get to ask your specific question today, you felt like your topic wasn't covered, please email any of us or call, and we're happy to I'm sure respond to those questions.
And I'm happy to stay. If you want to stay and talk to me personally afterward. Yeah.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah,
Thank
that's
you,
fine.
President.
Yeah.
I want to just take a chance to real quick shout out to the staff here at the city who made this event possible today. Madison, Kim, Quinn, who's in the back. Quinn, thank you all very much for putting this together. And Representative Nguyen, I know you have some.
Yes, I've also got my staff, Jory, Chiefs of Staff, would you please stand? I know Mackenzie, also too. And is Monica in the room too? No, she's not. But the work that we do, it would not be possible without the assistance of our staff. And I'm just so blessed that we have such a dedicated group of chiefs of staff and legislative aides and staff members help us do all of our jobs, both on the House and Senate side. So again, we get to be the face, but the real work happens in the offices, and it's through the work of staff. So,
can I say one final thing? Okay. So people may or may not know that Lori and I had 4 kids, still 2 in the high school, and 2 more that have successfully graduated and moved off. Starting 20 years ago, the Lake Oswego School District established something called the Local Option Levy, or the Local Learning Levy, as we call it here. And we have had it on renewal for 4 times, increased it a little bit. This time is up for renewal. And so I'm looking out to Liz Hartman and John Wallen and Linda and John Winland and others who have actively participated in this. You're going to be receiving a ballot here. Because I'm not on the school board, I would just want to say, please vote yes for our kids. There we go.
That's right. Thank you, Senate President. All right. Thank you very much. Thank you, everyone, for coming today. We appreciate it. And thank you, Senate President, representatives, for making the time to be here with everyone. Thank you all. Have a great afternoon.